Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank you, Chairman McHenry, for calling up this legislation, the Chinese Military and Surveillance Company Sanctions Act. I look forward to bipartisan support for this legislation. And I want to, at the outset, thank Anthony Chang for his outstanding work as staff on this legislation, his tireless efforts to get this bill right. Hunt Vandertal and Megan Gilton also for their very valuable contributions. This legislation, to all my colleagues, this bill is the most severe set of financial restrictions the House of Representatives has ever considered to counter China's military ambitions. It would impose mandatory blocking sanctions on entities that are essential to the Chinese military-industrial complex, prohibiting virtually any transaction with U.S. persons and deterring third countries from dealing with defense-related companies in China. Let me explain why this should be a bipartisan priority. In 2020, the Trump White House declared a national emergency with respect to China's military-industrial complex, an emergency that was reaffirmed by the Biden administration a year later. As a result, both the Trump and Biden administrations prohibited the purchase and sale of publicly traded securities in companies connected with China's military. President Biden expanded the scope to include surveillance technology companies that enable repression and human rights abuses in China. These companies now belong to Treasury's CMIC list, which includes some of China's leading technology firms such as Huawei, Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation, and Hikvision, along with several dozen other corporations that Treasury has found are supporting China's military and defense capabilities. While I'm pleased that Treasury has assembled the CMIC list, investment restrictions have proven merely symbolic, not a meaningful policy tool to undermine future aggression by China. For instance, a number of CMIC companies don't issue publicly traded securities to begin with. Others, such as SMIC, have seen their gross profits and R&D rise by double digits after being listed by Treasury. China Telecom's stock price has risen by over 50%. In 2021, a company like Huawei had revenues over 700 times larger than any financing it received. This fixation on investment has distracted us from securing real results. Even in cases where an American can't buy shares, we're simply prohibiting trades between investors, not choking off support for the company itself. When a policy like this meddles with capital flows while leaving the CCP unaffected, it makes it look like the United States is no longer serious about its governance of capital markets. My bill takes a different approach. Blocking sanctions will cut defense-related companies off from revenues, technology, and hard currency. Under my bill, not only would Treasury be required to go after Chinese firms with significant operations in the defense and surveillance sectors, the Secretary would have to make an annual determination as to whether the CMIC companies qualified for those sanctions. And this point is key. I fully expect that Treasury would conclude that CMIC companies fall under this bill's sanctions authorities. After all, they're on the CMIC list precisely because of their activities related to defense and surveillance. But even if Treasury does not make that determination for some reason, the CCP has at most a year until the next determination. During that time, a sword will be dangling over every CMIC company, and compliance departments around the world will ask themselves whether or not dealing with such an entity is really worth the risk. Many will conclude it is not. There is a lot of talk these days about de-risking and restricting capital flows to China, but this is how you actually do it. And I do mean de-risking, not severing ties between the two world's largest economies completely. But what I do mean is this is tough. This is the right way. And as tough as this bill is against China, it stays laser focused on impeding Beijing's defense and surveillance capabilities. H.R. 760 is about making China's military ambitions impossible, not outlawing benign activities and creating economic mayhem. This is a red light, green light approach. This gives certainty and confidence to the private sector and to investors around the world what is off limits and what is benign. I again want to thank the chairman for his support of this legislation, as well as my colleagues on the committee who have enriched the debate over how we best approach China. Their views have informed this bill in important ways, and I urge their support today, and I urge the support of colleagues on both sides of the aisle, also off of this committee, who care about combating China. This is the way to counter China. We don't counter China by mimicking China or imitating
Gentleman's time's
China.
expired.
We do it this way. I yield back.